look at something in Baptist history. And of course, yesterday being July 4th, wanted to take a moment and just talk about one of the signers of the Declaration. We celebrate July 4th of independence by Congress. It was made on July 2nd. That is the day that John Adams thought would be the celebrated day. Then Congress approved on July 4th, and that's the day we celebrate. And actually, the document was not signed until August 2nd, about a month later. But we know many of the stories about the founding who made this possible. Yet the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence in the summer of 1776 could not have known just how successful their effort would be. But the one thing they did know was that they were committing high treason against Great Britain and the king, their king, George III, by signing their name to a document that renounced their allegiance to that country. And as Jefferson wrote in the final sentence of the document, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. For over 20 signers, that was very woeful for them in the years after 1776. Many of the signers would pay with their lives. They would be killed during the war. 17, almost a third of the signers, lost every penny they had and every piece of property they owned. Yet not one reneged on their pledge to stand for the support of the Declaration. Not one man out of the 56 signers ever recanted or apologized for in 1776. As a delegate, William Ellery, who we're going to talk about this morning, he recalled years later having stood next to the document as it was being signed, and he wanted to look into the faces of those that were signing it, and he said, "In no face was I able to discern real fear. That courage was tested but never faltered." Now, William Ellery, he was born in the early 1700s. He was educated by his father in the early years of his life. He entered Harvard as kind of a testament to his father's teachings. He entered Harvard at age 16, graduated when he was 20, and he was wanting knowledge. He graduated with degrees in Greek and he was a Congregationalist, but he was a godly Christian man. And he would become a lawyer and then a clerk of the Rhode Island General Assembly. And it was in that capacity that a Baptist pastor approached him in 1763 and asked for him to aid them in putting together a charter for what would become Brown University. Brown is the 7th oldest university or college in the United States, and one of the very few that was started before the Revolutionary War. Now, there was a great disagreement between the Baptists and the Congregationalists, because when he asked Ellery to help him, Ellery brought in some of his Congregationalist pastors to help this together. And Ellery noted that how stubborn the Baptists were, but he would credit the Baptists for that same tenacious spirit that prevailed in Congress and really spurred the delegation to take deliberate action, as many wanted to take a more timid approach. He was deeply concerned about this timid approach, and he thought it would gain approval. So at one point, he stood to the front and he said, "Gentlemen, you must exert yourselves. Be ruled by sons of liberty, how debasing. There's liberty and fire enough." And he held up a bellows, and he said, "All it requires is the application of the bellows." He said, "Blow then, and that blast will be heard and shake this country to its core." And he said he was honored to be one of the signers of the Declaration. As I said, he situated himself close to where they would sign. He said this: "I was determined to see how they all looked as they signed what might be their death warrant. I placed myself beside the Secretary, Charles Thomas, and eyed each closely as he affixed his name to the document. Undaunted resolution was displayed in every countenance." And as I said before, he said, "In no face discern real fear." Many of them would pay the high price, and as I said, Ellery himself was singled out by the British soldiers. They burned. He was actually fairly wealthy by the time the war started, but he was not killed, but he was singled out by the British, and his home and his estate was burned to the ground. He barely survived. He had many children with all their lives, and because of that, lost every dime. He did survive the war and later became a strong opponent of slavery and sought to abolish it here in this country. And he served his country till his death. He, for a time, he was a justice on the Rhode Island Court. Actually, then President George Washington later appointed him to be head of customs in Rhode Island, and he died at the 1820. And you know, when these men of character and commitment took action, and then God rewarded them and brought forth the fruits of faith and freedom. And we want to thank the Lord this morning for this kind of obscure signer of the Declaration, but a great man in what he did and what he stood for. I thank the Lord this morning for these men and what that means to us as Americans.